When a religious Zionist guy wakes up in the morning, what part of his life is the implementation of his mission? Is it the Zionist part, meaning he is in a kibbutz dati, a religious kibbutz, working in the farm? Is it his Torah learning, helping the needs in the society, impact on the media, right? What exactly from all of the things you do throughout the day is this implementation? And when you ask this question, the answers given change the way that the mission is perceived by the agents.
Hi, and welcome to the Z3 podcast. I'm Amitai Fraiman, the director of the Z3 project. In today's episode, we are going to hear a conversation between myself and Mr. Yossi Ben Harush, an educator and teacher at the Shalom Hartman Institute, and a doctoral candidate at the Ben Gurion University in the Negev. He's researching the Hasidic movement in Eretz Israel during the interwar period. The Z3 project, which this is the podcast of, aims to create a public square for conversations about Zionism, Jewish peoplehood, and the relationship between diaspora, Jewry, and Israel. And in this podcast, we have, throughout our different episodes, conversations about different ideas and elements that pertain to Jewish life here in the U.S., outside of the U.S., and in Israel, of course. And we hope that you enjoy this conversation. We explore elements of the religious Zionist movement in Israel, the political party, the ideology, a little bit of the theology, and the social aspects of it. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow us on our various social channels, on Facebook, on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, or X, and TikTok. Enjoy our conversation. Welcome, Yossi. It's great to have you here on our Z3 podcast. And as I told you, we invite different guests, thinkers, leaders to have conversations about burning issues that are related to the Jewish world and Jewish peoplehood and the relationship between diaspora, Jewry, and Israel, current events. And it's super exciting that you're here.
Thank you.
It's always great to have friends on the podcast and the opportunity to have deep conversations with them. So what I'm hoping to do is, as we typically do, is have our listeners learn a little bit more about your background to give them framing and context of who you are and your work. And we'll take it from there. But I think today, primarily, we're going to focus on religious Zionism in general, some theological elements, some ideological elements, the intersection, and in this moment that we're in, post-October 7th and the war, how this all plays out in Israeli society. I think it's an incredibly important conversation in general, and all the more so in this moment. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a great pleasure.
Yeah. I feel that the moment is requiring us to have some deep conversation about the situation we are in and how do we see ourselves in not in 2 weeks, not in 2 years, but maybe in 20 years and 50 years. I think it's very important. You said religious Zionism, theological aspects and ideological aspects. My story starts meeting those aspects when I was very young. My parents are both, my father was first generation Ole from Morocco. My mother is second generation family from Morocco. And they arrived at Jerusalem, very newlyweds. And they have me after a couple of years. And when they think about where to send me to school, they immediately think that I should go to what is called a mamlachti dati education, right? With the public religious, a very weird conundrum that we don't really know about outside of Israel, but
yeah, because there's three for our listeners. There's two. In the general education, there's like the secular and the observant. Two.
Yes.
State-sanctioned public schools.
Yes.
Streams, and you have to choose You don't choose a school. You choose like a path, and then you get placed in a school based.
Yes, exactly, and it's very interesting because you have this. Those two are public in the way they are open to everyone, and you can choose where to place your children. And then there's a path that you go into. You start at elementary school, and then you immediately go to middle school, and then high school. Someone might say that even colleges are in the same path, like Bar Ilan or other places are in the same way of education. So my parents did not grow up in the Israeli education system per se. My mother did in a way, but my father didn't. My father, when he made Aliyah, right after a couple of years, he dropped out of high school and started working. And then he went to a professional school, learning to have a profession. And they immediately knew that they want to send me to a public observant religious school. And when I walked in, I remember, I think it was like, I guess it's the second or the third grade, I realized that the characters that create the atmosphere in my school, I did not know them. They were not familiar to me. And I saw pictures everywhere of people that I don't remember hearing stories about. And I don't remember, seeing them in other placements, in other places except this place. And I remember constantly asking myself, do I really understand what am I into now? Is this really a place that I can feel like home? And the best example is that ever since I was first year in yeshiva, when I was 18 years old, I have two pictures that I take everywhere with me. One picture is the Baba Sali, Rabbi Yisrael Abu Chatzera, a very famous Moroccan leader that became known for his influence on the Moroccan community in general. And someone that I knew ever since I was like 4, I guess. And I also take a picture of Rav Kook, of Avraham Cohen Kook, chief rabbi of Israel, a famous character in the religious Zionist world, that I think I've met for the first time when I was a fourth grader, when I went to Bnei Akiva.
You meant like his image, his
yes, exactly.
his
I didn't meet any of them
Yeah.
in person, but I did. Yeah, I saw his image on the wall in my local Bnei Akiva sniff, the branch of Bnei Akiva. A big picture of him on the wall, and he looked rabbinical. Of course, if you ever see his picture, he looks very rabbinical. But I never saw him before. I clearly remember this day that I never saw him before, and I was wondering, who is this guy? And then he was mentioned constantly. So I have this, I tell this story. I don't know if it's historically correct, but for my narrative, I heard about Harav Kook every day on my school days, and on the weekends, I would hear everything about the Baba Sali, all the stories were about him. All the stories about Harav Kook in the school days, and all the stories about the Baba Sali in the weekends. And that was my introduction to the theological aspects and the ideological aspects of what is religious Zionism. It happened through the school. I'm not sure that my parents made this decision when they were completely aware of what's it going to give me and what kind of a world it will build for me, but that's what they did. And then when I grew a little bit older, I realized that I need to invest myself in this, because you can't be part of something, at least for me, that you only know tidbits of. You only know like the punchlines. You need to dig a little bit more. And when I decided to go to yeshiva, first of all, most of the yeshivot in Israel are mainly focused. The theological aspect is focused on Rav Kook and his teachings. Of course, in the larger context of other thinkers and other scholars, but he is very prominent. And I did a lot of investing in trying to figure out what kind of texts and writings that this man had in the early 30s of the 20th century has to do with me now growing up. So I did a lot of investing in this, and then my life after that. It's interesting to think about it, but I thought about it before I came here. The decision that my parents made when I was a first grader had much more impact on my sociological connection than the investigation I've done later in my life about the theological and theological aspects. The sociological aspect is way more binding than every other aspect, right? Because when I grew up in a public religious school, And then I went to the Religious Zionist movement, Bnei Akiva, youth movement, Bnei Akiva. And then I moved on to like the yeshiva, and then I moved on. I was already very much connected to religious Zionism without knowing, let's put aside me investigating all the theological and ideological. And I think the most interesting part of it is when you are presented with a mirror of this, and they ask you, where do you see yourself when you look at yourself in the mirror, right? And we talked about this before. Bezalel Smotrich, right? His political party, is now called the Religious Zionist Party, right? So now, when this happened, I remember having a conversation with my friends. What does it mean when now there's a party, political party? Some of us among our friend group agreed with the ideas and the political path that this party represents, and some of us did not agree. But we were all looking at ourselves and saying, we are religious Zionists. So when you create a political party that has its name on it, what does it mean about, me, my friends? How do we see ourselves in this mirror that was portrayed?
Especially because, as you're saying, before it becomes a theological position, it's a sociological one.
Yes.
And a sociological one is reliant on public titles that are given.
Yes.
Right. So no one asked. It wasn't voluntary. It was foisted on us. But it creates a very deep a path of questioning, maybe a journey, because it's so embedded from a very young age. Right. It's a social construct of who we are.
Agreed. And I think, I don't know. There's a lot of things to be said about the creation, the formation of this party, but for sure, from my personal experience, it created, it resurfaced a lot of questions that I dealt with when I was younger, when I was in my teenage years. What is religious Zionism? How do I see myself in it, other than the sociological? Is it just sociological? Is it really based on a path of developing ideas that comes from certain figures? Probably going to talk about those figures later on, but certain figures that created a movement, and this movement continue on the same path and the same way that those figures wanted this to go to. Is it the same thing altogether, or is it a little bit different now? So I think it really resurfaced a lot of the questions, and it actually started a very interesting Facebook group that's called Rethinking Religious Zionism. Right? People started saying, wait a second, if now this is the case, let's rethink it again. What are the characters that we put in? What are the theologians and ideological people that we put in this mix? And some came up with different answers, Yeah.
So I want to pull on that thread in a minute, but as you're speaking, there's something that, a lot of it resonates, because we grew up in a very, very similar background on the one hand and a very, very dissimilar one on the other. Mm-hmm. But part of what's similar, and I'm curious if this is also your experience, there's a multi-generational component to any sociological group.
Yes.
And so the way you said, that your parents sent you to a school without necessarily considering all the luggage or the baggage that comes with belonging. Not that it was different from what they thought it was, but in the end, your father was a first-generation Israeli, right? And your mother second, but women, it's a whole different thing we can talk about as well. But for me, similarly, like my parents they both made Aliyah from the U.S., and I was also put in a very similar path. And I always felt like disjointed, not because my parents were religious, but like I didn't have the inherited like religious Zionist theology or approach like through my in my DNA.
Yes.
Like we latched onto it.
Yes.
And there were a lot of social cues all people around me knew and I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And so like that difference, like not that what is going on at home, what's going on in school, there wasn't a lot of talk in that sense. So I'm wondering if you had a similar experience from a different angle of like trying to like why are we asking ourselves these questions at such a young age? Because we're trying to mediate between there's a Baba Sali for you at home, right? It's a different a different context from school maybe. Yeah. Right. And there's like and so like just even though like the observance is the same, the prayers are the same, right? There's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of differences as well. And I'm trying to, I'm just curious to hear from your perspective. That was.
Yeah, I think I told this to someone recently. It felt like I need to be the best in religious Zionism. It felt like I need to catch up and more, right? Because, again, you're right. I was the first generation. I was actually the first generation religious Zionist in my family, right? I'm guessing you were right? Your parents were somewhere in what's the American definition of religious observant Jews.
They came
Not
in,
even.
they were about Tshuva in Jerusalem and Pardes.
About Tshuva,
They didn't grow up, they grew, you know, they were also learning. They had to catch up. We had to catch up. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody
to
needed to catch up on something. Yeah. So being, that's actually interesting because it's not your second generation religious, first generation religious. Yeah. So, you know what? In some way, I am too. First generation religious, because I don't know if the religion that I've been practicing since I started the school is the same as my parents. But this is maybe a topic for a different podcast.
Somebody else on a different couch. But
yeah, exactly. Someone else on a different couch. That's true. I think so. When you become the first generation of something, and this something is already in motion, right? This something is already big in motion, and there are people that are representative of this motion, and they were close friends of mine. Meaning, I grew up in a neighborhood that I could look around me and say, "Oh my gosh, those people, their fathers or their grandfathers were such an impactful figures on the world that I'm trying to become a part of, right?" And I needed to be the best. So I knew every song, and I knew every quote, right? And I still to this day remember plenty of quotes, and I don't think a lot of my friends remember them by heart as I am. And I wanted so much to be part of the youth movement, and I really wanted to be the role model of what it's like to be a religious Zionist. And when it's fine when it's only sociological, but when it hits you from the ideological perspective, and sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it does create a little bit of tension. Wait a second, is this really my thought? So in my head, as a teenager, I say, I can't change religious Zionism. The only thing I can change is myself. So if I see any kind of friction happening between me and the movement or the whatever the sociological context, the sociological field, I need to change myself, right? And I remember myself a couple of times like facing those frictions in the environment I grew up in, and always ending up conforming to the main I think like perception of what should be. Now that I'm in my late 30s, I feel comfortable to say maybe. So I feel comfortable to say three things. One, maybe the program needs to change and not me, right? Maybe there's something wrong about the program that needs to change, and it still be the same thing, but it will tweak a little bit. You know, it will evolve 2.0, 3.0. It should be evolved. Two, I can now say, and somewhat confident, that maybe my teachers and the people that taught me got some of it wrong. You know, they didn't get it in the way they should have got it, and they missed out on some ideological component or some theological component that they were very important in the beginning of the movement, and actually were very important for me if they were given to me in a different age, but they weren't given to me because they got it wrong. And it's fine, it happens all the time. You know, some of my teachers were teenagers myself, right, in the youth movement, and I get it, it's fine. And the third thing I'm comfortable of saying is that identifying as part of religious Zionism is not the most crucial part in my identity, right? There is other parts that are important to me, and I don't know if something triumphs my identification with being religious Zionist, but it's sure not the most impactful. There are other elements in my life that impact the same or even less, but it makes the picture a little bit more complicated. But if you would ask me when I was 16, what are you? I would probably, my first answer would be, I'm a religious Zionist guy who lives in Israel. You know, that would be my first response. And now, I have to sit you down and give you a paragraph about what am I right now. But it became a lot more complicated.
Yeah. So, what I'm hearing you say in a way that's, it's very resonant with myself as well, but is in the earlier years, right, in the formative years of in your story and quite frankly, likely in others as well, is, and in other contexts, is not like a uniquely religious Zionist. The sociological element of one's identity is very, very dominant. And as you progress through the different stages of youth, and then you went to yeshiva to study, before the army and all that, you also self-selected to dive in deeper, to feel a sense of agency, maybe an ownership over the subject matter for all kinds of reasons. Whatever, we're not going to sit here and analyze, that side of it, but certainly in the sense of, the conscious decision of this is important.
Yes.
And if it's important, then I need to know what's going on.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. You're right. I think that a major part of the yeshiva world in general, in Israel, the yeshivot that are related with religious Zionism, want to create this, and they started
this,
the sense of agency.
Okay, yeah.
I think they were created in order to establish this sense of agency, and that's why I think it's very, very unique to the religious Zionist Torah study movement. Yeshivot, mechinot, there's a lot of things that falls under the same category. That you invest a lot of the time in what is our theology, right? You go to a Haredi yeshiva. I'm in my academic career, I'm very much focused in Hasidut and in Orthodoxy, Haredim in general. You go to a Haredi yeshiva, there's probably, 10% of the time is invested in thinking about theology, thinking about ideology, talking about the ways you should improve myself, self-improve, hold yourself to a higher values and so on. But most of the time, you dive into the Talmud. You're reading page by page on all the commentators throughout the generations. You walk into a religious Zionist yeshiva, multiple hours are invested in reading Harav Kook's writing, understanding what we're doing, and it depends. If you go, there's a spectrum, of course, of religious Zionists, and as you go into the spectrum, you find yourself experiencing the same level. The teachings would be different, and the characters talking would be different, but it's very much invested in figuring out who we are and figuring out what is the agency that we need to develop because of who we are and how we impact the world because of who we are. Because unlike other religious movements in Israel, there is a sense of we need to have impact on the Israeli society and on the world eventually. And this sense is very important because it creates I use that term in different places, but I think it relates here. It creates an ideological driven movement. When I say driven, I don't mean that it was just created to build the movement. It is also continuously reaffirmed to progress the movement, to make the movement bigger, to have more impact in other fields and so on, and to always remind ourselves what is our mission in this world, right?
In other words, that is the divide maybe between the ultra orthodox which is the religious community, and that is the connection with the Zionism piece, the religious Zionism, right? That the fact that the world has changed so much, right? Our reality. So there's an applied version of what we're studying, and if it's applied, that means that it has to be adapted to reality. If it's adapted to reality, then and we have to make that bridge between a theological and an ideological position, right? And the impact has to be real world and not only internally focused. Yeah. Right. In other words, so that's what I think one piece, right? Is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
And maybe, and this is as a question I'm asking, is is part of that also because it's a not by much, but a newer movement, so it's not as established. There's a lot of questions we have to figure out.
Yes.
So like the newness of the context and the newness of the movement makes us need to catch up in a way. And then the real world application of it, of course, which is a big piece of it.
Let's for the sake of this, for the sake of our discussion, let's try to do an experimental thought, right? Try to attack it from a different angle. Let's talk about regular Zionism, right? Let's say you're part of a kibbutz somewhere in the north, right? So you wake up every morning and you go to the field and you work and you come at night, and at night in the people's house in Bet Ha'am, everybody's sitting down, right? It's the early, 20s, 30s. Everybody's sitting down and they're discussing what they're doing. For them, what they're doing is the ideology implemented in reality, right? When they go out to the field and they work, they know exactly that this is what they need to be doing. And when they come back tomorrow and discuss, should tomorrow we'll milk the cows at 4 a.m. or at 5 a.m., they know that this discussion, right, because the mazkir, right, the whatever of the kibbutz will stand up and say, everybody, I just want to remember you that every time we milk the cows at 4 a.m., we are pioneering this amazing thing that is the return of the Jewish people to their homeland and creating Zionism and so on, right? This is just for the narrative of this story.
Yeah.
When a religious Zionist guy wakes up in the morning, what part of his life is the implementation of his mission, right? Is it the Zionist part, meaning he is in a kibbutz dati, a religious kibbutz, working in the farm? Is it his Torah learning? Is it his helping the needs in the society? Is it his? Is there impact on the media, right? What exactly from all of the things you do throughout the day is this implementation? And when you ask this question, right, the answers given change the way that the mission is perceived by the agents, right? So I think the most, at least in the Israeli media, is army, right? Is the IDF, because the amount of people that identify themselves as religious Zionists, who holds medium to high-ranking officer positions in the IDF, are religious Zionists, which is super interesting, because they're not the same percentage in the society in general. And I've heard a few times that the greatest mission of a religious Zionist is to be an officer in the army. That is the most important way to implement your mission. But religious Zionism existed before there was an IDF. And we can see that in the underground movements before 48, the numbers of religious people were kind of close to their percentage in the society. Everybody took part in some way of the form in the underground. So what changed? What happened? Why is this a recalibration? Why is this the mission? I think that the concept of the army, the IDF, a Jewish, let's put it in the correct terminology. The Jewish army fighting for the existence of the Jewish people in the Jewish land is a culmination of everything that the religious Zionism wanted to achieve. Because here you have someone who has the youthfulness of the Zionist movement. We're doing something physical. You have someone who protects the borders of the Holy Land. Religious Zionism is very much connected to, at least major portions of it is connected to the land and the importance of inhabiting the land. And you have someone that holds the beautiful set of values that the IDF gives their soldiers and officers, right? So this is why it's a beautiful culmination of everything you wanted to achieve. And then the mission of what religious Zionism is, it changes, right? It is no longer, you know what, I don't know if no longer, but it's not sitting in a yeshiva learning all day. Even if you're learning, I don't know, religious Zionist writing. And it's not putting yourself into 5 years of giving out to the needs. You are focused on being the best soldier you can be. And it's very interesting. And you can see the results. You can see that as I said, like the backbone of mid high-ranking officers and the IDF are religious Zionists, because that's the mission. And now it's being portrayed. I'm wondering, I don't know, I'm guessing it's a lot, but I'm wondering how many people get up in the morning when they're high school kids and they say, why is this the mission? And do I really, fully 100% convinced that this is what I should do? And when I answer the question no, does it change my affiliation to religious Zionism? This is the questions that I think are super interesting to hear from people in the formative years that you talked about. I don't know. It's a good question, but
it's super fascinating. I'm always, trying to. It's very similar to my personal experience, going through high school and all those things. And I'm curious if there was a part of the deviation, because I can imagine that part of the strategy, right? Uri Orbach.
Yeah.
Right, he's like, you have to go to the media. Uri Orbach, he was a religious Zionist, one of the most prominent journalists.
Right.
He
was a minister.
He was a minister also. Yes,
Yeah.
he ultimately was a minister in the Knesset, and he always tried to push folks to shift because he understood that the public discourse happens in that arena.
Yes.
And I wonder, and similarly also in the military, because as you said, in the earlier days there were different communities that sent that the military was made up of them.
Yes.
Right, and these high-ranking officers, etc. And I wonder if part of it is, if it's like a never-ending cycle almost, right? Of the utility of going into the army is because that is the surest way to reach the highest levels of Israeli society.
Yes, that's true.
Right?
Yes.
If you're going to be, if you go into combat, if you're, and then there's an elite unit, if you're an officer, if you're not, if you rise in the ranks, the chances that you then become, you have access to business or public life is much greater. So, was the plan originally to use this as a way to, what's the word I'm looking for? Social mobility and acceptance, right? But at some point, it kind of did it go astray? Did we get it wrong? Did we stop there and forgot to think about the other stuff? There's a whole lot of the militarization of Israeli society that we're, the constant war and all that stuff that we are a product of ultimately. I'm not saying that with judgment. I'm saying that as an observation. Growing up with the intifadot and what that does to your psyche as a kid, growing up, etc., right? But I wonder if what is that part of it, and we got stuck, and we're just now populating that in the army, or is that just has always been? I'm not sure. I don't know, because I remember. I'll give you a story. This is why. When I went to look at yeshivot after the army.
After the
before the army. I went to all the yeshivot I went to were to Hesder. To the program that allows you to do basically 3.5 years in yeshiva and 1.5 years in combat, and you do miluim with everybody else. And I didn't go to any mechinot, which is 1 year or 2 years before, and then a full army service. I checked, Otniel, Petach Tikva, Kriyat Shmona, the regular major. And then I checked one kibbutz dati yeshiva. It was the last place I went, and when I went to one of the yeshivot, one of the rabbis there, he was wearing whatever. Never mind, lovely guy. He was like, he said, most people. This is what he told me. I remember this. Most people think that we need to strengthen the sword, the army, and those are the people that go to mechinot. They have to be the best soldiers. He says we understand that we have to strengthen the arm that's holding the sword, so it doesn't waver, right? And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I'm going to do a full army service. I'm not looking for a way out. And whatever. But the ideology of the other place also resonated more. But that's beside. But the point I'm trying to make is I think that I wonder, now that you're saying it, did he mean we need both, and this is why that program is best because you have both the ideological and theological grounding, so you're sure and steadfast with the mission, right? And you also do the service. You're doing both, or did he actually mean? maybe the military, the combat piece is important, but not as much as the theological perspective.
Okay, so I'll try to give some different aspects about it. The first thing is that what you're talking about is that what is called Rav Kook's son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kohen Kook, once named this field divine politics. It's a very interesting term, politica elokit.
Yeah.
And was the end goal of this a part of creating social mobility and having more impact on the general arena of the Israeli society? And you do it through the army because you've seen those who before you, the kibbutz people and all those people, that there were officers and so on, and then they became members of the Knesset, prime minister, whatever. Or it was just, this what I called earlier, like the culmination of all kinds of ideologies. We have to say that a couple years ago, for the first time in Israel history, we had a self-proclaiming religious Zionist prime minister, Naftali Bennett.
Yeah.
He was a religious Zionist prime minister. And he never hid his identity. And he said a few times that he is religious Zionist. He said that wasn't the only thing. He said he's going to be a prime minister of everybody, like they all say, but he was still a religious Zionist prime minister. I think, but this is only my take on this, that it was more of a coincidence than it was intentional. I think that the religious Zionists in Israel did not want to achieve this level of responsibility in the Israeli society. I think they wanted to achieve some impact, but that was a lot. And the political atmosphere at that point was very much confusing, and Naftali Bennett had the opportunity to create, and he did a political thing. But when it was, again, it's another mirror shown to the religious Zionist society. What are you doing with this? And some of it said, it's not so bad. It's not so bad. We already have some impact on the media. We have a lot of impact on the army. We have some impact in business, which is interesting. Not enough as you would expect, but we have some impact in business. What about our impact in politics? There was always a religious Zionist movement. Right? It was never called Religious Zionist. It was called the National Religious Party, Hamafdal. It was always like this idea, and they always, since the beginning of time, on the Declaration of Independence of the Israeli Society, I think two people that later served as members of the Knesset from the Religious Zionist Party, from the National Religious Party, are already signed there, right? So they always had a representation, but they always had this very enclosed section of what is their impact in society, right? They were always, they were always education.
Ministers of education.
Right, they were always ministers of education, and they had some contribution to the ministry of religion, right? They had some impact on that.
But, I always wonder if that was like a protective position or like, if we don't have because I remember in high school, when there was a secular ministry of education, we were like, everybody was, like she's gonna, because the streams of education goes back to the beginning of our conversation, are funded by the state and they can influence the content. Is it about trying to turn everybody to be like you, or to at least protect your own boundaries as a community? Right. Both, maybe both.
It's very interesting. At some point, I think at least that's the story that we told ourselves, is that we care so much about education. It's this idea that I said before, ideological driven movement.
Yes.
Why do we care about education so much? Because we believe in ideology and we want to teach ideology, and therefore who is better to trust us with the Ministry of Education than us, right? We are the religious Zionists. We truly believe in the ideology that so we can teach the young kids the ideology.
It's such an interesting, because even in the thought experiment that we did, you and I here, right? and because I know you, right? I know this was not intended. It's so interesting, right? Like when you describe the kibbutznik,
Yeah.
right? He comes home. In the evening, they're going to have a meeting of the kibbutz to decide administrative decisions about when we milk the cow and when we pick this and what are we gonna plant next, right?
Yeah.
And the religious side, when they come, they have real. Now I know, but we both know, right? The Zionist movement is reliant on extreme, not extreme in the position, but like heightened sense of mission, ideology, and text. But certainly from the religion, this perception of, and this is till today, this right, like the tension between groups of like, we are a cart.
The full cart.
The full cart, and there's the empty cart, right?
Yeah.
The empty carters, right? But like the truth is that's more of a that's a sociological position, right? Of like trying to how do you right? It's and we don't have to go there. We don't have time to unpack all of that. But I think what I'm trying to tease out from what you're saying about Naftali Bennett being prime minister, right? Yeah. And this constant question of like, what is it about us?
Yes.
Right, that is religious, that is Zionist, that is both of them together, and how does that play out?
Yeah.
And you suggested earlier that today it seems that the military is the perfect place to bring all those things together.
Yes, and I think it was unintentional. Again, it's my take. It was unintentional to have so much political power. You have a prime minister, but when we got it, some of the people said maybe we should shift, maybe we should take it from the army. Maybe we should take it from this place and move it. And media, by the way, media is very important. Let's give it 2 sentences. Media, the most prominent commentator that sits in all the TV shows in Israel is religious Zionist.
Yes.
And he is presenting an opinion that a lot of people that are in the studio with him does not agree with. Yeah. But he's still doing it. And in the funeral of Uri Orbach, he said, thank you. Yeah. Because of what you wrote, I'm here where I am today. It's very interesting. Yeah. So media, army, they got this political position. Some of them said, you know what, that's nice. And here you can see that today, in the government, the Religious Zionist Party, it's a bunch of parties combined into a bloc, right? Yeah. But the people from the bloc are holding very serious positions that never in the history of Israel did religious Zionist people hold those positions, right? We have the Minister for National Security. We have the Treasurer, right? We have the Minister for Diaspora. A lot of people don't know that, but we have the Minister of Diaspora. We have the Minister of Legacy, of Heritage. And there's a lot of people that are very much involved holding ministerial positions that are very serious, that we never had as a religious Zionist society. So I think that for some of the people, even though they won't admit it, Naftali Bennett breaking this glass ceiling made a lot of impact. So that's one thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is when you start to deconstruct, right, the religious Zionist persona, right, you find that religious Zionism is more of a string that goes around other aspects of your persona than something that is the center of your being. What am I saying? If you look at the religious Zionists, they dress like any other person, unlike Orthodox that they keep a very strict code of dress code. They have the same TV shows, the same movies, they listen to the same radio, listen to the same tunes. They have both genders holding positions that are meaningful in the society. They go to the universities, they participate in the market, like the labor market, and so on and so on and so on. So what is the religious Zionist aspect of it? I always say that it's like the string that holds everything together. how can that be that I go to a Daf Yomi class, but then I go watch a movie, and then I go and I live, I live in Judea and Samaria, but I go to my country club, and I work out in the morning, and I go to the pool in the evening, and I with my friends we're bike riding, and so on and so on. How and my son is an officer in the most elite unit. How does it all operate together? Because there's a string that holds everything together, and this string is religious Zionism. Because added to this, right, the movement started out as, okay, there is Zionism. Zionism is very secular. That Zionism doesn't mention Judaism or the religion aspect of Judaism as something that they want to treasure, they want to value. You can, if you want to practice religion, it's fine. We don't tell you not to do so, but we're not celebrating it. It's not a crucial part in our aspect. So the movement wanted to say, look, we tell you that we can be both. We can be Zionist, very Zionist, and we can be very, very religious and Jewish from that perspective, from the observance perspective, and let us have both of them. And the consensus of the Israel Society said, okay, you can have it. But Zionism, as you know better than me, doesn't just hold this idea of coming to, going back to the land and so on. It holds a very secular perception of what is the everyday life, right? What is important? Culture, Zionist culture, is interesting to explore, right? And I'm sure you've talked about it before. What is Zionist culture? It's very much based on European culture with takes that, makes it our own. But it's not religious. Zionist ideology is not religious, If you, going back to the experiments that we did, if you need to milk the cows on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, you do it. Because, it's a necessity. And when you try to put religion on top of it, right, there's a tension. Who caves? Who goes back? Is your Zionist, and again, I'm putting in Zionist, I'm using this word for now, to put everything that is secular, right, that has a culture of its own, that has, how do you celebrate Shavuot in a kibbutz, right? It's very different than how you celebrate a Shavuot in a religious community. So let's put Zionism here, and let's put religious here, religion with all the heritage and so on. What caves? What goes back? So I think that what happened is that we said, okay, let's put the whole things in a pile and use the combination of the two to have a string that circles it out and says, okay, so now if we put a string around it, it makes it okay, right? I remember that one of my rabbis published a book about what do you do with your free time, right? So he talked about, can you go see movies? There, there some may have some pictures there that you don't want to see, and can you gossip with your wife when you come home from work and your boss really annoys you? And I read a beautiful critique by a Haredi author. He says, this is the problem. Religious Zionist people think that there's something called free time. What is free time?
Yeah.
What is this concept? You don't have free time. You're constantly obligated to do God's work. What do you mean free time? What do you mean watch a movie? How do you get to the point where you can watch a movie? And I said, this is a brilliant way to look at religious Zionism from a different angle. Religious Zionist people have free time. They have fancy coffee machines. And they make really good coffee in the morning. And it's fine, because there's this thing that secludes. Now, I'm asking myself, and it evokes the question almost. We just spoke about ideological driven movement. And now we're talking about this mishmash of all those identities, right, put together.
But it goes back to what you started with. It's a sociological construct. It's about belonging to a group, and these are the parameters of the group.
Agreed. But also,
we're trying to infuse a higher meaning because it drives us.
Interesting, yeah.
Right? But ultimately it's about belonging. Maybe.
Can I tell you that this week this whole week, I've been trying to make ideological comments, and people keep pushing me back to sociology.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't know what's about this week, but I did it a few times, and people said, "Why are you saying it?" You know what? I'll tell you why, and I'll talk personally now. Because I'm a true believer in ideology. I am.
Yeah.
I am a true believer in ideology, and I think that we don't pay much attention to ideology anymore, and how it really drives us from the bottom. I know I'm a minority, and sociology explains a lot. Explains better than ideology, but ideology, I think, it's kind of let down.
Is sociology? I'm not an academic, but is sociology just a retroactive perception of ideology?
Wow, that's a very good question. That's a very good question.
Now, moving forward, I am ideologically driven, right? I don't tell myself I do in my moments of conscience. I say I do this because I belong to a group. But why do I belong to this group? Because I believe in A, B, C, and D. That's the ideology.
Interesting. I think the interesting case to explore is what happens if I have the ideology, but I'm not part of the group? And what happens if I'm part of the group, but I don't have the ideology? Yeah. And I know people, when I'm saying those words, I know people that are both. Yeah. I have an image of them in my mind. What happens if you're true? You know what? Let's use what we came here to speak about. If I'm truly religious and Zionist, but I'm not part of the religious Zionist community. Let's say I'm Haredi. And after October 7th, I am now convinced that I need to contribute as much as I can to the Zionist project. So now, almost naturally, I become religious and Zionist, right? But I'm not part of the religious Zionist movement, and I'm not going to. It's not my goal. My goal is to remain, who am I? So it's an interesting, where would you put it? And I know a few people that are inside what we call religious Zionism, but don't share either the religious or the Zionism part of it. So, I think if I'm answering from so the sociological answer is interesting, and I can totally play along and I agree. But if I'm answering from the ideological perspective, that I think there's a beautiful saying that we are the dash. We are the hyphen, right? We are not religious and we're not Zionist. We are the hyphen. Yeah, we're the hyphen in between. Yeah. Because I think that the ideology of religious Zionism is allowing ourselves to have an ideological driven life without having it to control every aspect of life, right? And this is, I think, in a way, a mature form of ideology, right? It's not all-consuming. It allows you to have an ideologically driven life, but it does allow you a little bit of, cutting yourself some slack with other aspects. Now, and I think that, we're talking during the war, I think now a lot of people asking, what exactly is the ideological part that is leading to me? What exactly? Now I understand that it's not, that I understand that I can look right and left and I can see people that are more driven ideologically, less driven ideologically. Okay, but what is my drive? What is the pinpoint of what am I doing this for, right? And this is super interesting. The answer, unsurprisingly, is one of three things, right? The Holy Trinity of religious Zionism. So a lot of people say it's the land. The land drives me. A lot of people say it's the Torah. It's God's words that drive me. A lot of people say it's the people that drive me, right? The camaraderie and this idea, the sense of a nation. And I think that this is a super big challenge to the religious Zionist society, is the balance. What kind of balance we want between those three? What kind of, how do we create a balance between those three that doesn't pull too much to one direction? Or maybe we do. I'm sure that some parts of the religious Zionism, and you can see that I'm already talking in parts, which means like I made religious Zionism big, that has like all kinds of sections under it. But I'm guessing that some parts of it wanted to be more driven to one of those elements. But I think the majority wants a balance. And what kind of balance would it be? It's a very interesting question. Going back to sociology, is sometimes it's really hard to find the balance. Sometimes it's so hard that you just say, you know what? Let me have my sociology. I'm good with that. Let me have my my free time, and let me have my But I think now, after the war, after October 7th, a lot of people are pushed to redefine their ideological narrative, and for many people it's political. For many people it's religious-wise, it's like observance-wise, it's like my connection with the divine-wise. But I think for the religious Zionist movement, it's a lot of questions about land, a lot of questions about investment in learning Torah, learning scriptures, and a lot of questions about the people. What kind of people do we want, and so on and so on. Where can we contribute the most? Do we need to have more ministers? Do we need to create, on-the-go centers that are going to help the society as they are? Or we need to go, and fight, volunteer for actual fighting the borders of what we're doing. It's really interesting to see the different takes that those people are taking in different elements. But I think it's a time of ideological questioning and exploration. And that's why I'm very much invested now in my academic field, and I'm doing, I'm an historian, and I'm a historian of ideas and ideologicals that, 100 years ago. So why am I here talking to you, about this? Because I think that I'm also on the same, search. Like the kid that went to, first grade, was put in this thing, and then later on had some research about it and figure out and read some texts. Now I'm re-questioning a lot of my assumptions and a lot of my conclusions. What exactly? Where is this going? And it seems that at least leading voices in the religious Zionist society in Israel are also asking the same questions. What is now the focus? What are we going to teach kids? When the war started, I became a third grade teacher in a school of people that were evacuated from the house. And so I'm asking it from an educational purpose, like a perspective. What are we going to teach in public religious schools in Israel in 2 years from now, after the war is over? Hopefully, B'ezrat Hashem, sooner the better. But what are we going to teach? What kind of religious Zionism are we going to tell those kids? What would be the ideology that will drive them to be religious Zionists? And I think it's a super interesting question. And it's interesting it will be interesting to listen to different answers, I guess.
Yeah. So we're running. We're near the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we talked about a lot of angles and experiences in the past in this conversation, and I think what I find one of the many points I find resonant, especially where we kind of landed with this conversation.
Yeah.
Who knows where we start, where we land, right? But I think that in general, I think this is a point of inflection for Israeli society. I think it's the exploration that religious Zionists are going through at this moment, right, is one of many of other groups
Yes.
as well. And I think it's not, people are throwing out different names for this war, right? There's the official name, etc. One of them is the Second War of Independence.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a part of that, people are eager to kind of like, or people are realizing and internalizing that this is a watershed moment. The what was is no longer the case in multiple areas. And I'm very curious to see where it goes, where Israel, where world Jewry will be in a year, 5, 10, 20 years from now. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, thank you so much for
always
inviting
enjoy
me.
our conversations. I look forward to more of these. So really, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.